over time, I've come to accept it, love it for what it is, understand myself. But I think for a lot of ADHDers, they go through a phase where they're like, this is really hard. I kind of wish I didn't have this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani. Welcome to today's episode on the 6 Degrees podcast. I'm your host Ahmed Kamal and I'm joined with my co-host Hannah Omar today. Today we have a very, very special episode lined up for you. Joining us from naturopathy in this very wonderful studio is Sister Eman Allouche. Sister Eman's journey to where she is today, from her struggles to her success with ADHD, will be the topic of today's discussion, inshallah. We will also be addressing her experience as a Muslim woman living with ADHD and discuss some of the nuances of the condition and all things that come with the label.
To give everyone an introduction to Eman, she is a qualified naturopath and nutritionist. She has extensive experience working in retail health environments and clinical practice. She runs workshops across topics in women's health and more recently to other health professionals about neurodiversity affirming practices when working with neurodivergent clients. Her style in clinical practice is rooted in evidence-based approaches to healthcare. Some of Eman's key areas of focus include women's health, such as PCOS, PMS, PMDD, fertility, pediatrics, and mental health. Her personal diagnosis with ADHD has also led to a further interest in this area and how she can utilise her experience and expertise to support neurodiverse individuals.
And pay respect to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations, the custodians of the land in which this podcast was filmed. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
We recognise the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people and the oppression endured by communities in Sudan, Congo and beyond. The legacy of colonisation continues to affect generations, profoundly impacting the mental health of those who confront these challenges. May Allah ease their suffering, grant them strength in their trials and inspire us all to act with steadfast solidarity and kindness.
We also understand the impact this conflict is creating on the mental health for people in our collective communities. Please note that there will be mention of suicide within this episode. If you're in crisis, please contact Lifeline on 131144 or any of the other helplines listed below.
How are you, Sister Eman?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
All right. Well, we're excited to have you here. And this is kind of a little bit of how we always start off our podcast. We like asking our guests, what have you been grateful for this week? So, Sister Eman, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, sure. Like I said earlier, I'm really grateful for my body this week, and having access to a gym and being able to exercise is something I've been really grateful for, and it's been something that I've been struggling to get back into for a long time. So I'm really grateful to be able to integrate that back into my routine and reap all the benefits from exercise this week.
Love that. Is there like a particular exercise that you like doing? Is it like Pilates or is it
just resistance training, like
Love
weight?
that.
Yeah, functional training.
Bench.
Yeah, look, my bench is a bit rusty at the moment, but yeah, just anything like lifting weights.
Awesome.
Feels
So
good.
you're getting back into that whole routine.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what about yourself, Ahmed?
Bench, or as in like what I'm grateful for?
Or what are you grateful for? But you can answer both.
No, I'm not gonna. I haven't been to the gym in a long time. Actually, it's quite embarrassing. But what am I grateful for? Yesterday I had a really good day. It was really good because in Ramadan I went to Rodwan's bakery, and the guy there, he was actually such a gem. Like, he always has the biggest smile. And I went there for suhoor. It was like 3 a.m. And then I went another day. It was like just a random 4 p.m. And I saw the same guy, and he had the same smile. He was so sweet. He remembered me as well. And then I show up yesterday, like the middle of the day on Friday, and the guy's still there. He's always there, but he always has that really positive, he's got such a great vibe about him. It's so wholesome, and it feels like a home away from home kind of thing, like not being in Egypt or not being around the Egyptian community, even though he's Lebanese, but like Arabs kind of thing. It's just such a homey vibe. I felt so good. So yeah, that's pretty grateful about that.
Love that. Nuances is always a vibe, hey?
What about you, Hannah?
What about me? I think my one is very simple, very straightforward. I just recently finished my first semester of my master's degree, so alhamdulillah, I'm very happy about that. I didn't even think I was going to get into masters, so finishing my first semester of it feels like a very, very big blessing, alhamdulillah. So yeah, that would be what I am grateful for.
What is your master's in?
I'm doing my master's in clinical psychology
Amazing.
right now. Yeah.
Can you read my mind?
Of course. That's what psychologists do. Not yet, maybe in the future. Ask me next year.
Yeah.
So, Ahmed, I know there is a couple of things about ADHD that we might need to know before starting this episode. Would you be able to brief us on a little bit about that?
So just like a quick intro into like what ADHD is.
Exactly.
So ADHD is like a neurodevelopmental disorder, and symptoms usually include like inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and they express themselves differently to different extents in different people. It's not like a lifestyle choice that people have. They're not undisciplined or not disciplined or anything like that. So yeah, and things like lifestyle changes can help, and they can help modulate those symptoms. Behavioral therapies can help, medications can help, various other treatments, but ultimately it's far more complicated than I guess we can understand or delve into in this podcast. But it's definitely real and it does exist.
Awesome. Eman, would you be able to expand on some of the symptoms that are associated with ADHD?
Like some of the things that Ahmed mentioned, hyperactivity, impulsivity are some of the ones that we see with the hyperactive picture. I mean, it'll be better if I sort of broke it down.
Feel free to.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 different types of ADHD. We've got the hyperactive type, we've got the inattentive type, and then we've got combined, which is a combination of the inattentive and hyperactive traits. With the inattentive traits, it's more a difficulty focusing and concentrating, difficulty sort of regulating attention. And you can see a little bit more daydreaming, especially in females. This is the sort of symptoms that you might see, kind of off with the fairies, wandering. And then with hyperactivity, you see more of those physical manifestation of symptoms. So they could be fidgeting a lot, lots of sort of physical energy within their body. And but some professionals have also spoken about hyperactivity in terms of with women, in terms of like racing thoughts as well. So that's an interesting way of looking at hyperactivity in females.
Okay.
So it is very interesting.
Yeah.
I guess it's not that external of a symptom as well, right? It's quite personal and individual, and unless you asked and probed into some of that, you wouldn't really know that they have racing thoughts and things like that.
That's
fascinating.
Chronic state of overwhelm, I think, fits in with that. So yeah, with combined, you've got just a mishmash of all of those different symptoms and heaps of other life things in between.
Awesome. Okay. I guess now that we've described and defined ADHD a little bit for our audience, would we be able to hear a little bit about your journey to ADHD? You know, how did you first get your diagnosis? Did you always know you had ADHD, or was this something that you found out recently, Eman?
Yeah, so I'll take you guys on a bit of a journey here, of a timeline. So growing up, I was always a very active sort of person. Was very talkative. I was sort of like the class clown, the class chatterbox, and that was just always something that was a part of my character. So I never really perceived that to be something that was an issue, and I think for the most part that was something that was embraced, you know, by my family and people around me. Now that I look back on reports in grade 6, I see that I had a lot of issues, but nobody really looked into those. So until I had to source those for my psychiatrist, which I'll talk about later in this chat. So, yeah, growing up, especially in primary school, these were some traits that I had. And then when I started high school, I went through some changes. So I changed schools, I went through bullying and just a number of different struggles at school. And I think, you know, we often talk about trauma sometimes with ADHD presentations, and there can be different history around that for some neurodivergent people. But I'm not sure if that was a pivotal sort of impact on some changes that I might have experienced in my brain and moving schools. But I definitely started to see changes with academics and just how I was going in terms of navigating being a teenager when I moved schools. So I moved schools roughly in about year 9. So I was probably 14 at the time. And I saw a drastic change in my academics, and I struggled to make friends, and it was just a really big change that year. And I think, like I said, I had a lot of those hyperactive traits, but I never really struggled academically up until sort of year 9, year 10.
Got it.
And I had a lot of absenteeism around that time as well. So there was a couple of years that I missed like a big chunk of days of school, and I was frequently tired in school as well. So when I recall my time in VCE, I would sleep a lot in class, miss a lot of classes, and really, really struggle with homework and doing things in between classes and doing, SACs and assignments and all that sort of stuff. And at that point, I knew that I struggled with doing work, but I thought that was just something that was a part of my character. Work's not fun, work's a bit boring. And Mum didn't really notice anything in particular because I have a brother who's older than me by about 3 years, and he had much more overt symptoms of intellectual disability. So he was diagnosed with intellectual disability, but that wasn't really defined in terms of what that was for him. He never really got diagnosed with anything in particular as far as neurodivergence goes, but he's very much undiagnosed. Something's there. We've got a lot of the same traits. Like I think if he's like a boy version of me. His life is very dysfunctional. So, yeah, I think because he had so much going on, Mum never really had a chance to focus on me because he needed a lot more support, and he moved schools a lot. He was constantly getting into trouble. He was getting kicked out of school. So, we see that a lot with boys in terms of their behaviour at schools, and, because their symptoms are so, appear quite differently to females, they're often addressed in a different way. So, so at that point, nothing had really come up, and I, got married at a young age, and my life was pretty, I would say, a little bit dysfunctional in some ways in terms of like I was studying full time, I was working casually while I was studying, and I always struggled with the household things. But again, this was just something that was, part of my life, part of my character. I never really, ADHD never really became something that occurred to me as a huge problem until COVID lockdown. Wow. Yeah, so there was a lot of changes around that time. So, so got through uni, did okay, got a decent ATAR score, did okay at uni, not as great as I'd liked, but still got through, which is a lot of a lot of ADHDs might be listening, some of them don't finish uni at all, fail a lot of units. So this is something that's often looked at when you're going down the diagnosis path as well. When they see that you've, graduated high school, your ATAR was okay, if they see that you finished uni, that kind of gives them red flags as like, oh, you might not be ADHD if you were able to go through all these milestones. Again, because it comes back to ADHD looks different for certain people, especially women.
Absolutely.
So, that relationship, I ended up getting divorced. That was in about 2019, moved back in with my parents, and I started consulting in my own business, and I definitely encountered some issues there. I would really struggle with admin. I would really struggle with anything outside of the context of a consultation. So any type of, follow-up emails, treatment plans, it would take me so long to do things, and I couldn't understand why. And, at the time I was living with my parents, and Mum would say, oh, if you've got work to do, like you need to just get it done. And I'm like, well, I just can't. I just can't. I don't know why. I just can't do it. Like, I don't want to do it. Like, I want to. There were times where I was like, I want to do this, but it just feels really hard.
Was that one of the first times people had kind of pointed out the fact that it might just be an easy, you can do it, but you realised that you couldn't do it?
Exactly. Yep. So I definitely started asking myself those questions when I was living with Mum at the time, because she could see that I would, work, come home, like I'd spend a lot of time out, spend a lot of time doing leisure, but when it came to the things that are not that enjoyable, things that don't give you dopamine, like housework, doing admin, checking your emails, mundane stuff, she couldn't understand why I couldn't do those things. But if we fast track, so I got married the following year, 2020, COVID happened, moved in with my new husband, and things got really difficult after that, really difficult. So, and it was probably more challenging because we were both navigating undiagnosed mental health issues at the same time. So he had something going on, I couldn't put my finger on it. I had something going on, couldn't put my finger on it. But if you think of the worst combination ever, that's what we were, because he got clinically diagnosed with OCD and OCPD, so obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which has a lot of different traits than your standard OCD. And I, had undiagnosed ADHD, which is the complete opposite. You've got perfectionism, extreme organisation, extreme attention to detail, very critical of others, all the things that ADHD is not. So I was like, this is really hard. Yeah. And I hadn't experienced that in my previous relationship. So I had all these struggles, but they weren't anything that was pointed out. It was just kind of like, oh, you haven't done the dishes in like 4 days, I'll do it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas in this relationship, it was like, oh, like, why are you not doing this or why are you not doing that? And it looks like you're lazy.
Yeah, and like you were under scrutiny almost little bit more. And it's like going back to what you said before about how your mother was never kind of as involved as she was with your brother. So it wasn't pointed out until someone pointed it out to you.
Yes, and it wasn't happening in a way that made me question my self-worth, made me question my ability to participate in worldly affairs, and because we were spending so much time at home and we were together, and he was working from home, we were together all the time. He was constantly seeing these things that I was doing and these things that I would struggle with, and because of his, the condition that he was dealing with and still is dealing with, and he wasn't getting any support at that time, he was very, very critical of me. And I think, even outside of OCD, I think this might be the case in a lot of ADHD households, to be very honest. If people don't understand, it's likely that they might say things or might approach things in a way which does kind of belittle your experience or make statements which can be really harmful. And I had to do a lot of work sort of to work through some of those really challenging periods. But in terms of, appearing like you're lazy, not trying hard enough, this was something that really started to affect me. And that's sort of when I had to go down the path of getting support, because I kind of hit rock bottom. I started to become really suicidal. Thankfully, alhamdulillah, I didn't, attempt a trigger warning for anyone who's listening to this. I didn't end up, attempting suicide or anything like that. But suicidal ideation was like every single day. It wouldn't go away. It was, something that I was experiencing for about 6 to 9 months. And I was just convinced that like, this is just going to be my life. Like, when is this going to go away? And then at the time, after I got diagnosed, I realized that suicidal ideation is very common with ADHD, and I think it affects about 70% of ADHDs at some point in their life. I have to double check, that could be a lie. But
I'll round that number.
Yeah, find the statistics somewhere. But that's when I started seeing a psychologist, and I was just getting crisis support, crisis management at that time, because obviously I was really not feeling like life was worth living. And, at the same time, I also encouraged my husband to go get some support, because I just knew that something, wasn't right there. I was like, I get that I'm struggling with all these things, but I don't think it's
not just
I don't think it's that big of a deal to be fighting about like all the time, like always fighting about like housework or like, even like me not doing the tasks that I wanted to do. It was like, that was like an issue, well, you said you were going to do that. And I was like, but I didn't do it. I had a nothing day, and and he was be like, but how do you have nothing days? Like, I'm always, bang, 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 go, 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 just complete opposites. So, I started getting crisis support, crisis management, and then I just, started to feel a little bit better about life, but I knew that something was still going on. So I actually had to do a series of questionnaires for my psychologist before I saw her, and I noticed a pattern in the questionnaires where just a pattern of different things that I would answer, like, struggling to sit still, fidgeting a lot, feeling very overwhelmed, sort of constantly thinking about things to do, feeling unproductive, feeling really tired, just different things that I was starting to put the dots together. And I thought, you know what, this kind of sounds like ADHD. And I knew a little bit about ADHD, obviously, studying at uni. And, I had friends in the past that used to say to me jokes like, they joke around with me and be like, oh, you probably got ADHD or you're giving ADHD energy, those real like, So that's when I realized, I'm like, I think something's there. And I brought it up to my psychologist, and then she said, look, you probably do have a lot of the flags for it. She did an extra series of questionnaires with me to sort of validate that concern, and then she referred me to a psychiatrist. And that's sort of the standard process for anyone who's listening, who's concerned that they might have ADHD. You generally start with a psychologist. They do their own series of assessments, and then they refer you out. So I saw a psychiatrist. This was in COVID. I got diagnosed, and he recommended medication. And that basically was sort of the end of history from there. So I realized that I had it, and it took me a long time to sort of process that. And not everyone around me was fully understanding or supportive or accommodating of that diagnosis. So, yeah, even my husband at the time, he was like, wow, like, I'm really surprised. Is that actually a thing for adults?
Wow.
Is that actually a real diagnosis? Like, I still kind of think you're just a bit lazy. And then I was like, okay. So not getting that validation was really hard. But again, he was coming from a place of extreme perfectionism and, being the complete opposite. Mum, I remember having the conversation with her, and Mum was like, oh, I just thought that you didn't really like school. I just thought that you just wanted to have fun. Like, I didn't think that you had ADHD. Like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, Mum, like, it's pretty legit. Like, I definitely have this. So whereas a lot of my siblings were like, yeah, that makes sense, and especially they'd seen me grow up and demonstrating a lot of these traits. So, yeah, over time, I've come to accept it, love it for what it is, understand myself. But I think for a lot of ADHDers, they go through a phase where they're like, this is really hard. I kind of wish I didn't have this. So a lot of people can resonate with that. And yeah, I guess it's constantly like an up and down sort of cycle. But yeah, so from that first diagnosis, I went through a series of trying medication, doing different things. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me. Then I saw another psychiatrist who said I didn't have ADHD at all. He thinks I just have trauma. And he was like,
wait, what?
Yeah.
Just trauma.
Yeah, he was like, I think you have trauma from your childhood. And I was like, you know what? Like, for the most part, my childhood was okay. Like I did go through things like bullying and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, there were things that I experienced that were negative in my childhood, but I had a lot of those traits early on. They just kind of exacerbated, I think, as I went through different life stages. And again, a common thing as well, and there's research on this now, is you'll see changes during puberty. So I went through puberty at the age of 14. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in terms of those periods of hormonal change will have an impact on the way ADHD presents. So I think now that I look back, that makes a lot of sense in terms of how my symptoms changed. I moved schools at the same time, all these different changes. But
those kind of things like moving schools and whatnot, that can kind of mask your symptoms as well, like as in that not being correlated with ADHD. Oh, she moved schools, or we moved houses, such that, etc.
Yeah.
And then it's like, that's used as like the scapegoat kind of thing.
Yep.
And then ADHD is just like invisible. No one realizes, there might be a condition behind all of these symptoms.
100%.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like that was quite a pattern. Like, you kept on slipping under the radar and like having these like masking, I guess, some of your symptoms.
Yes.
And I know that this is quite common in women with ADHD specifically, and a reason why they're underdiagnosed and they slip under the radar. Is that an experience, obviously, that you can relate to as well?
Yep, 100%. And most women will get diagnosed with anxiety or depression way before they end up getting diagnosed with ADHD. And it's a common comorbidity, and it's often the case because they're struggling so much with navigating their life with ADHD that they then start to become either, in my case, it was depressed, it was depression, or really anxious. So yeah, I ended up actually later getting diagnosed. This was about 6 months ago with my third psychiatrist. So, anyone listening, sometimes you got to do the research, you got to do the rounds. You've got to hop around, see who works for you,
Trial
see
and
who's
error.
actually going to listen to
Yeah.
what's happening. But yeah, I saw my third psychiatrist about six to 9 months ago, and he was like, you've got ADHD, but he went through a completely different diagnosis route. So he made me get reports from my high school, from primary school. He made my husband fill out a questionnaire. My mum had to fill out a questionnaire. Everyone had to just basically confirm that, life was dysfunctional for me. And just having that objective data on paper as well was really powerful for me, because I was like, wow, like, people are observing these things that I'm struggling with, and they probably have been for a while, but until you get a professional to kind of lay it all out for you, support you in that process, then you don't really know why that's the case.
100%.
So now I'm working with him, and on top of that came a diagnosis of depression as well. So, but it's just been nice to finally have a psychiatrist that is listening to you and validating your experiences and looking at your whole journey and basically picking up those missing pieces and putting them together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds like a really hard and like tumultuous journey, but do
Yeah.
you feel like your experience of getting the diagnosis later in life has affected the way you interact with it as like an identity as well?
Yeah, definitely. For a long time, I think I was really hard on myself about why I would struggle with a lot of things, why navigating the world was so challenging for me. And after getting that diagnosis, it was actually really validating. Just to put those experiences into perspective and say, hey, there's actually a reason why I struggle with all this stuff. I'm not lazy. I'm not unproductive. I'm not undisciplined. I'm not addicted to my screen because, I'm like this zombie. My body's chasing dopamine in different ways, and it has been trying to do that for a very long time, and that presents very differently for different people. So I was able to understand myself a lot more and just really hold space for myself and be a bit more compassionate about, why I live the way that I do and the things that I struggle with. And over time, I've been able to get a little bit more support and understanding from the people around me in that space as well.
Kind of what has that looked like in your like everyday life, that kind of support and understanding? Like if we take a scenario, you run us through a scenario like pre and after.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the transition been like?
Yeah. So look, I have these days where I call like nothing days, where some days I have like a list of things to do and I get none of those things done.
Like
Absolutely nothing.
That's so good.
And once upon a time when I'd have days like that and I'd talk to my husband about it or a friend about it, I never felt understood or supported about having those nothing days. And when I have those days, my husband will say, that's okay. You've got tomorrow. Like instead of having that negative sort of mindset, because he understands how much it's impacting me now, he'll help me to break it down and help me to sort of plan what I might do the next day. And then just focusing on the things that really need to get done that are urgent, for example, in terms of like urgency, optional. He's helped me a little bit with that. So that's probably the biggest example in my day-to-day life that's just been helpful in terms of, you had a bad day, that's okay. You can move on.
That transition is really powerful though. Like it gives you that space to sort of reset, rethink, because I think the ordinary can always be very, very difficult for people with ADHD, just the everyday things that I think people that might not be neurodiverse will find very, very easy, like doing the dishes, and they can do that just like passively. But for people with ADHD, it's like honestly the biggest effort to do this. And
it's so true.
Continuously every day putting this magnormous effort, I don't even know if that's the word, to do these everyday things, on top of that doing the amazing things that we want to do, you do get burnt out, and it, you might not have things to show for it, but you do.
Even things like forgetting important dates, or that was also a big issue that I experienced even with friendships. Like if I forgot someone's birthday or I forgot something was on, people would get really upset about it.
100%.
And I did actually have to cut out some friends from my life that were just being really unsupportive and not understanding about certain things around that, like just being forgetful. Being forgetful or zoning out in conversation. Like, their perception is that what you're talking about is not important to them. So my husband will just cue me back in. He'll just be like, hey, are you still here? And I'm like, sorry, I wasn't. Like, can you start again? Like sometimes, and just being okay with that, being okay with repeating,
100%.
What you're saying for someone, and not like, oh, you don't listen, I don't want to talk to you. I think that validation is just really nice.
It makes it so much easier to build on that relationship as well. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess understanding is really important, like for a lot of us, but especially with people with ADHD, there is sometimes that added level of understanding that we all should kind of foster and create, for sure.
Yeah.
You did speak about a little bit about medication. Has medication helped you with like the journey of managing and being supported in your ADHD, or?
Look, so far, unfortunately for me, it hasn't. And the main medications that I started with were stimulant medications, so dexamphetamine, Ritalin. Because they're stimulants, and because I was also experiencing traits of depression as well, They were making me feel more anxious, and I was having just a lot of different side effects that weren't outweighing the positives for me. And that's obviously not the case for a lot of people, but there are a huge bunch of non-responders, which I've realised just through my own clinical experience and practice, that, you know, we've got great evidence that these medications work well, but there are people that just don't respond. So initially it was really disheartening to not have that light bulb, like, oh, like the clutter in my head is gone and things just feel clearer. And so in the beginning it was really disheartening because I'm like, why isn't this working for me? Like, this is not fair. And I think because I was at the start of that diagnosis, I was still really not happy with where I was at and sort of hating myself for the way that I was. But over time, I've shifted that mindset a lot. And I've been working with a lot of other sort of strategies that I have been able to implement to support me. I was going to start a non-stimulant medication with my new psychiatrist. And I was also put on antidepressants. So there was a lot of sort of other medication use that was sort of explored on that journey. But unfortunately, as part of a little bit of preconception care, which I'm working through at the moment, you can't use stimulant medications, and even non-stimulant ADHD medications are not safe if you're planning, for example, on getting pregnant.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there is good clinical research to show
That's
that
really
it's harmful for the infant being on stimulants during pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
So that was a path that I was going to go down in terms of trying a non-stimulant medication, but it's not safe to use should I fall pregnant. So I thought, it's not worth the risk for me. But that's why I guess it's so important to work with a professional, working with a psychiatrist that understands the female body, the female anatomy, and what is and isn't safe is really important because, there's lots of research on some interventions, but not on all. So even with the antidepressant that I was taking, they didn't have a lot of clinical data to sort of swinging either way, but some case studies to show that it was safe. So navigating this stuff with a professional is so important.
SubhanAllah, while I was doing research for this topic as well, I found it really, really fascinating how much, I guess, women's hormones affect presentation of ADHD symptoms. And I think it gives so much understanding for women to understand that and realize, be like, you know, sometimes it's not in my hands. You know, it's really something biological that's happening within me. And I know that even over the lifespan, our changes in our levels of hormones and things like that affect the way we present with ADHD. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, if we look at the female body as a whole, we know that hormones play a huge role in our day-to-day life, and we know that hormones fluctuate throughout our menstrual cycle and throughout our lifespan as well, going through puberty, going through getting a period, going through pregnancy, postpartum versus going through menopause. So a lot of women, this is actually a trend that I started to see in clinic as well and with myself, was that a lot of women that I was meeting were experiencing really bad ADHD symptoms before their period, say the week before their period. And I was like, this is an interesting trend. And there's not, you know, there's not a whole lot of research on it. I think some of the earliest research on it is still actually quite recent. It's not like from a long time ago. Like, it's something that they're actually starting to navigate a lot more now. And it really got me thinking in terms of what is the influence of hormones on ADHD. So we now have a really good understanding on the impact of estrogen on the brain, and that during the cycle, for example, the menstrual cycle, we've got estrogen going up and going down. And in our second part of our cycle, so this is after ovulation. So first week of the cycle is when you've got your bleed, when you're having a period, and then you've got your second week, and then you've got ovulation. This is based on a 28-day cycle. And then after day 14, ovulation, we start to see a short dip in estrogen, actually dramatic dip right after ovulation, and then we start to see the rise of progesterone. And that dip in estrogen and that rise in progesterone does have a really big impact on our brain and a lot of our ability to, you know, manage tasks and to get things done, and our energy and our cravings and all of these different things. And so for a lot of women with ADHD, in the, you know, that week before their period, they will experience a dramatic difficulty with some of their symptoms, especially their ADHD symptoms, in terms of being able to plan, being able to focus or attend to different tasks. Lots of mood changes are really common during that time as well, so generally a lower mood. And
Sometimes a massive spanner in the works, doesn't it?
exactly, yeah. So, there are some women that are on, different dosages for medication or
I was just gonna
interventions
ask
just
that,
during
yeah.
that time, just to manage during that time.
Because if you are going through that sort of like mood swings and whatnot, and your symptoms are changing depending on your hormone levels, I think you would need to probably change up your stimulant medication.
Yeah.
And even worse,
Yep.
probably someone that's not speaking to a psychiatrist would then self-medicate
100%.
with their stimulant medication, and they just have it there, be like, okay, I need more focus.
Yeah. And that's why PMS, PMDD are very common with women with ADHD. It's because of the huge influence on mainly that dip in estrogen with those neurobehavioral symptoms. And we see that even during pregnancy, estrogen is on a huge high. So women generally feel really good in pregnancy. And I was chatting with my psychiatrist about this. A lot of women don't even have the need for medication during pregnancy because of the increase in estrogen makes them feel really good.
Yeah.
And then we've got a dip in that postpartum, and then during menopause, we've got a huge dip in estrogen. So a lot of ADHD symptoms show up in a really different way during menopause.
Just for our audience, what is PMS and PMDD?
Yeah. So PMS stands for premenstrual syndrome, and PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It affects, so PMS affects more women than PMDD. It's kind of like the really bad, ugly big sister of PMS, and it affects a much smaller percentage of women in the population, but it's an extreme sort of form of PMS, and it often will be like, for example, some women with PMDD will feel really suicidal the week before their period. So really significant mental health symptoms during that phase, and they will 100% need some sort of intervention because it has a huge impact on quality of life.
Got it.
Yeah, so a little bit different to PMS.
So I guess the symptoms of PMDD and PMS would be aggravated a little bit during these times as well.
100%, yeah.
Wow, subhanAllah, I really didn't know that. I guess maybe you can go on to our next section. Ahmed has a fun little activity, which is Do you want to introduce that?
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of a break, play a little game, maybe put out some myths about ADHD. I'll shoot with one first, and then feel free to shoot with one back. People with ADHD are hyperactive and they lack discipline.
That's probably the most common one that's floating around
Absolutely.
You just can't be
on the
stuffed.
internet.
It's probably like the caricature that people have in their heads as
Yeah.
well.
And I think we've explored really well that ADHD presents very differently for some people, and especially in women. Some people have no hyperactive traits at all. Sometimes their symptoms are only inattentive.
Do you feel more hyperactive or inattentive?
I'm very much both. Yeah, I'll get these
Good
bursts
mix.
of energy at about 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Just be like flopping, like jumping around the house. My
Yeah.
husband's like, "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" So
I'm going to change the world!
just so happy, galloping around the kitchen at 1 a.m. I'm combined. How about you?
Yeah, good mix too, I reckon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could relate to that. I do get like, it's like 2 a.m. or whatever, and I'm just like, you know what? It's time to hit the gym. It's time to change your life.
At 2 a.m.
Yeah, like
Oh, it's a bit
I'll never
hectic.
go, obviously, because my mom will be like, what's going on right now? But like, I'm just in my room. I'm like, you know what? Today's the day. I saw it actually on that. I thought it was just me, but I was scrolling through like TikTok, Instagram, whatever.
Yeah.
This is a very communal thing, so I don't know how ADHD this is, but it's like you're supposed to be sleeping and suddenly you want to change your life.
It's true.
It's a bit
I think
random.
that's a very common because and then you get the impulsivity with that as well. I
Yeah.
can do this.
Oh,
I
yes.
can do all these things.
You know, the thing
You'll
about
start up a
life
business at 2 a.m.
Yeah. Shopify tutorials and that. But yeah, that's pretty
All
cool.
the impulse purchases happen at that time as well.
Oh, you know what I've done actually? I've put my phone in the garage at 10 p.m. I've realized every cooked
garage?
Yeah, I'll take my phone, I'll switch it off, I'll put it in the garage.
Why the garage?
That's
Because
actually a
it's
good
too
idea.
far away from my room. For me to, because all the stupid messages I've ever sent, angry, whatever, anything, has been at night. Purchases.
Do you want to just repeat that part with the stupid out of it?
Oh, without the
Because
stupid.
Sundos gave you a funny look.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, not stupid then. Silly.
All the silly purchases.
Rather immature messages have come from my person at those times. So yeah, it's at those times where I think I'm the most unhinged. I've just realized, you know what? No, these are the rules I've set for myself. Yeah. It's good. It works. Garage is too cold. Like I'm nice and cozy. I'm not going to get up and do that.
I should implement that in my life.
How do you get your phone back? Like just in the morning, you just
I mean, the garage gives it back. What do you mean?
hands it back to you.
Yeah, just go to the garage and get it.
No way. That's crazy.
Mind blown.
Yeah. But no, it actually works wonders. I'm not gonna lie.
Awesome. So, all right, the next myth. What's the next myth, Ahmed?
All right. If you don't take medication, you're gonna have ADHD for the rest of your life. You're never gonna be able to do anything. You're pretty much finished. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's quite an intense statement there.
Yeah, but I mean, you kind of essentially, without people's waffle, that's essentially what doctors
It's
might
true.
say.
Yeah, it's
What do you
true.
think of that?
And that's usually the assumption when you see a psychiatrist as well. It's like, you're here for medication, right? Because that's what I'm going to offer you.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you don't often get a lot of the extra advice unless they find out that you don't respond or you want other
100%.
alternatives. So, look, medication is helpful and effective for a lot of people, and we have really good evidence to support its efficacy. But there are lots of integrative management strategies that can be integrated into like a holistic treatment plan to support people with ADHD.
100%.
I would even argue like the studies on exercise are like on par with like Ritalin. So
100%. I'm so happy you mentioned that. It's
Yeah.
like you have the most miraculous super drug: sleep, exercise. We have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing that ties all of that together beautifully, deep, right? You have those three. You put those where they're supposed to be. I think a lot of other things will fall into place, and the medication plays a part in that. It is not this kind of solution that people. I think everyone. Maybe I am
Quick
talking.
fix.
Yeah, it's like a quick fix. Like life not together, boom, life together. It's not really like that.
I think the important thing to remember is like medication doesn't give you strategies.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You know?
Doesn't help you deal with as well like the thoughts that you've developed about yourself, the stigma that
Exactly.
people have developed around you. Or
It's
the
just a part.
relationships you've broken.
It's just, all the
The friendships
all the
you've ruined.
friendships, all the people you've cut, you've
cut
X'd out.
At 11 a.m.
Yeah.
That's why we put the phone in the garage.
Yeah. I feel like you
Yeah.
don't love me, bro.
yeah. You never respond to my text
Yeah,
messages.
yeah,
You always
yeah.
doze off when I'm talking to you. You forgot my birthday.
Yeah.
So
Facebook is so good that it does remind you. Like people that put this is a message to people that put fake birthdays on Facebook. Why? What is wrong with you? And then I will message you on your fake birthday, and then I won't remember your real one, and then you get upset. Don't do that. Thank you.
PSA. What? Okay, so myth busted.
myth busted.
Amazing.
Yeah, you
What's
can
the next
survive without.
myth? Or fact?
Next myth. You're a child, you have ADHD. You're an adult, ADHD disappears.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yes.
It's definitely a myth.
Yeah.
And we've got, with a huge rise in adult ADHD diagnosis, we know that most people carry on ADHD into their adulthood.
But from what I understand, symptoms can kind of become a little bit more consistent
Yes.
and a little bit more manageable for some people. Is that right?
Well, the symptoms don't always stay the same.
I see.
I find that was my experience as well. Like, I think I was a lot more hyperactive
Yeah.
as a child compared to probably what I am as an adult. And again, you got the influence of hormones as a female,
Puberty as
all
well.
these different lifestyle factors that we're going to talk about shortly that play a huge role in that. So it might present differently, and like I said, they might get diagnosed with anxiety or depression first, or bipolar or some other condition. Misdiagnosis is very common.
Okay.
I want to actually jump onto that lifestyle factor bit. We'll start off with like an easy one. Sugar and that. A lot of people medicate, self-medicate. That was too kind of colloquial, but a lot of people
Yeah.
self-medicate with sugar. Red cordial as well. Does that cause ADHD? What do you think?
A lot of people avoid breakfast for a number of different reasons. They might not be super hungry in the morning. They might be too busy. For ADHDs, it's often I'm too busy and scattered in the morning to sort out a breakfast. I don't have the executive function for that. I need to get out the door. So a lot of what I actually do in practice with my clients when it comes to nutrition, a lot of people think it's just, eat this food, eat that food, deficiencies, blah, blah, blah. It's actually more about how do we make the eating journey easier for you? Because eating is actually hard for us. You need executive function, just as you do to do your dishes and to book your appointments. You need executive function to go to your kitchen and make a meal, or to heat up food, or to plan meals. So how can you make that easy? Having easy breakfast options available and starting your day with something that is nourishing, because you spend the whole day not eating. Right, your blood sugar's obviously dropped at 3 p.m. And your body is going to look for the fastest source of energy and sugar that's around you. It's actually a survival
100%,
mechanism. Your body's like, I know that Red Bull is going to G me up to do this assignment that's due in 4 hours. So that's the first thing that you're going to go for. So what you want to do is you actually want to prevent that. You want to prevent that dip. You want to start your day with breakfast. It doesn't have to be a huge meal, like a massive, like a sufra of biryani. And it can be something really basic. It can be Wheat Bix, with like a protein shake. Like as long as there's a bit of whole grains, a bit of carbohydrates, a bit of protein, then you're going to be satiated throughout the day. So you don't want to wait till 3 p.m. to have your first meal, or your first snack, because your body is naturally going to gravitate towards the options that are going to make you crash.
So that would just, you give you a dip. You wouldn't be able to focus after that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and if we're going to go, we might as well go through the nutrition stuff sort of in this segment, shall we? But your nutrition does play a huge role, and so people that aren't having regular meals, aren't having enough of the good foods that give them brain fuel, are not really giving their brain the best possible support that they can. So having a focus on things like protein is super important. The reason for that is protein is made of different amino acids. So the amino acids are just compounds that make up the structure of protein. They're actually used by our brain to synthesize dopamine. So what we actually see, which is really interesting, there's actually really large scale meta-analysis studies on this. People that are vegan or vegetarian are actually more at risk of mental health disorders, and especially like things like depression, because of protein's essential role in supplying not only nutrients but amino acids that are used by the brain to synthesize neurotransmitters, so your brain chemicals such as dopamine, serotonin, things like that. So this is often a hurdle that I come across in clinic when I do have vegan or vegetarian clients that are coming to see me with like ADHD, because we've also got research about, for example, the benefits of omega-3s for the ADHD brain. And even ADHD aside, we know that a Mediterranean style diet with whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, olive oil, fish is overall quite favourable for cognitive function in the brain. So it's the number one most researched dietary approach for cognitive decline, mental health. They're doing trials they're doing trials on it, like this approach to eating. It's a huge area of interest. So focusing on good quality protein if you can from fish, amazing, because eating those omega-3s. But that's why it's so important. But then we're also, if we look at the other nutrients that exist in some of these foods, or the other nutrients that are important as far as ADHD, we're also looking at things like, iron, zinc, B12, vitamin D, and these are all things that are very commonly deficient in neurodivergent adults, especially I find in ADHD. Like majority of the clients that I see with ADHD that come through the door, especially females, are all iron deficient. And, when you have an iron deficiency, you're likely to be fatigued, right? And that's a very common symptom with ADHD as well, especially 100%. That correlation with executive function.
Makes motivation much harder if you are fatigued.
Exactly. Yeah. And, things like iron, vitamin D, even B12, folate, these different types of B vitamins, they're actually all involved in that process of amino acids being converted into neurotransmitters and things like dopamine in your brain. So it's so important to have a good supply of those nutrients because your brain is using them. People hear about zinc and they think, it's just good for my immune system. I'll just take zinc when I'm sick. I'll just take it for sperm health. That's a really common one as well. But all these nutrients are actually implicated in different ways in how our brain synthesizes different brain chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, and they're often cofactors in different processes in the body, like methylation, for example, a process where different B vitamins are converted into an active form. There's all these different minerals that play a role in that. So, and they often do come up deficient when I often get clients to do them on blood tests. They're very common deficiencies that I see. So correcting those is obviously really important. Doesn't mean your ADHD is going to go away, right? Because ADHD is a part of us, right? So that's not the approach that we take with any intervention about going away. It's all about embracing your neurodivergence. But in terms of improving your quality of life, improving the way your brain functions, improving your mood, your energy, all of these things, supplying the nutrients that help that conversion a little bit more, you're doing all of that by looking at all these different factors.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You like that?
Yeah, I love that because I think even in Islam, obviously the idea that your body is an amana is something that is quite important. And the fact that if you have ADHD, you have to be taking care of yourself holistically, your sleep, your nutrition. And this is also, in turn, doing a service or an act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well.
100%.
So I really like that in that sense too. And I didn't even know that people with ADHD would, or you see people with ADHD have deficiencies in these certain areas.
Yeah,
So,
very common.
yeah.
Interesting that you mentioned sleep as well, because sleep disorders are very common with ADHD as well, and there's a lot of established correlation between that. So, you know, if you're someone that has ADHD or you're listening, and you're someone that is a mouth breather, or you snore at night, or you've been told that you are a very obnoxious sleeper, definitely look into that, because it's a very, very common correlation, sleep disorders with ADHD. And if you sort out the sleep disorder, then that's going to improve your executive function, if that's something that you have.
100%. It's going to improve all those symptoms.
Yeah.
And then you get to delve into the things about ADHD that might be like advantages, like the little superpowers. I think when you come to it from a much better point of much better place, you know, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're exercising well, you've got your vitamins and minerals in check, you're doing the things that you were not so good at a little bit better now, and you can now look at the good things of ADHD, the better parts.
One thing I should mention before we wrap up the nutrition section is also there's a psychologist. She's a clinical psychologist and researcher based in New Zealand, and she's been doing some studies on micronutrient combinations for both children and adults with ADHD. Anyone who's listening, I encourage you to look up her work, because her work's quite interesting. She's heavily invested in ADHD.
What's her name?
Her name's Dr. Julia. Did I even share her name? No. I was like, I check her out, guys. Yeah. Her name's Dr. Julia Ruckledge. So she did 3 studies. She did one in 2014, 2018, and one in 2021. And the first one was in adults. The last 2 were in kids. The latest one that she did, they're all good quality studies as well. Like the latest one that she did was a double-blind, or fully blind actually, randomized control trial. They're not very big studies, but they looked at the use of like a micronutrient sort of formulation with all these different minerals that we've mentioned and others. And they looked at how that has an impact on different ADHD parameters. So the main ones that they looked at were like emotional regulation, attention, and I think aggression, and this was largely in the studies for kids, and they looked a little bit at hyperactivity as well. And what they found in their, especially we're going to refer to the latest study that she did, was that it improved both attention and emotional regulation, and reduced aggression, but didn't help with hyperactivity. But what's been interesting is that, like, number one, there's been a good outcome with some of these studies. It was about a 10-week trial. But the governing body in New Zealand has actually looked at this evidence and has classified it as evidence-based. I think the governing body in New Zealand is called Pharmac. So they're similar to like FDA, TGA sort of thing. And in New Zealand, so because they've classified it as evidence-based, if you see a psychiatrist, you can actually talk about using it as an intervention. It's listed as a lower priority intervention, but it is something that they recognize as a potential treatment to support people with ADHD.
That's amazing, mashallah.
So that's like a really huge breakthrough, and like she's doing a lot of great research in that area. But again, it just consolidates this conversation that we're having about the importance of nutrients and them supporting the brain. And the important thing is that they looked at the use of this with children that weren't on medication as well, because that's obviously a confounding factor. If they're on medication, we want to make sure that, you know, we're not getting the wrong results, for example.
A lot of early studies actually didn't take that kind of thing into account. So they just label people as ADHD, and they wouldn't talk about gender or whether they're on medication or sleep disorders.
Yeah.
And it's just big pot of people.
Exactly.
There's ADHD. Let's just test them, see what happens.
Yeah. And this is the start of something good. Like, again, the small studies, like not more than I think 130 participants that she had in that latest one. But this is what we need done to build the bridge to do bigger things. And the fact that that's been, approved as something that's seen as evidence-based in New Zealand is fantastic.
It's a good step in the right direction.
That's awesome.
Definitely.
I'm going to just shift the conversation a little bit. And this is something I'm personally really interested in, especially to hear from people who have personal experience with ADHD. As someone who works in the mental health field, I think I find it a little bit annoying maybe when people start conflating little quirks or like little symptomology and conflating it to a full-blown ADHD diagnosis, saying, you know, I can't concentrate, I have ADHD, like making the jump really quickly when they definitely don't have ADHD and likely don't, you know, exhibit a lot of symptoms for it. What is your experience with, and how do you kind of navigate that? Because I could see how it might be invalidating your experience as well as someone who experiences a lot of struggle with ADHD.
It's definitely very frustrating to hear people speak about ADHD in that way, or just neurodivergent in general. There's something I speak about on Instagram sometimes when people say, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, we're all a little bit ADHD. It's very like, it's kind of it takes away from people's personal and lived experience. And for some people, depending on them being able to access a diagnosis and treatment, people are often living with a disability, and that's what we need to talk about as the core of this issue. Like, it is perceived as, in terms of some people's experience, as a disability. It has a huge impact on some people's quality of life. You know, your ADHD might present differently to my ADHD and so on and so forth, right? And so if I look at the way I was presenting during COVID, for example, it was really debilitating, and that was coupled with, you know, really bad depression at the time. But we're taking away from people's lived experience, and we're bringing it down to just one particular symptom or experience. It's like when you're having a low day or you're having a flat day, you wouldn't say, oh, I've got depression, for example. Or, you know, if you're feeling a little bit anxious, you know, before an exam, you wouldn't say, I've got generalized anxiety disorder. So there's a huge difference between, you know, going through different periods of your life or stages where you're experiencing a particular symptom or particular trait of a condition, between actually living the full-blown experience of that condition. So
Yeah, I feel like it's really common nowadays to use a lot of different disorders as these kind of like descriptive terms for how you live your life, or like what you're struggling with in that moment. And as you said, it can be quite like belittling and invalidating to those type of people. And
everyone kind of takes a diagnosis in different ways. Like for some people, that diagnosis or that label is a really important part of their identity, and they kind of, it's everything for them. Whereas for some, it's like, nah, this is me and this is my ADHD on the side. So, you know, everyone has a different approach in terms of, you know, how they mesh with whatever diagnosis they've got, or how it impacts their identity.
But, you know, honestly, on a positive note, I think, me personally, I feel like the people that are close to you genuinely do become a lot more aware of these things. And yeah, it's a change for the better. I think not having your ADHD known to the people that you love can lead to that. Like if you know you have ADHD and it's secret, can lead to more of that than letting them know. And
just in line with that conversation that we're having, obviously a lot more people are getting diagnosed, and that's becoming like a hot topic because everyone's saying, oh, you know, everyone has ADHD these days, and that's really a huge myth that's going around at the moment.
Another myth buster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, the way we can look at that is the same way we can look at literally any condition. Like we weren't diagnosing a lot of conditions like 100 years ago because we didn't have maybe the tools and the apparatus to diagnose a lot of these conditions, whereas now we're talking about things. We're talking about mental health. We're raising awareness. When you 100%. Raise awareness about something, people are more likely to come forth and seek help and admit they have a problem. So this is the reason why we're getting a lot more diagnosis, and it's not because, you know, people are addicted to their screens.
Yeah. And as well, like a lot of the data comes from America, from United States, and they're genuinely a much more over-medicated society than I'd say the rest of the world. So it's not really an accurate representation of our experience here, or the experience in the UK, or the experience in Egypt, or whatever.
It's so true. Yeah. Actually, a lot of the controversy around food dyes actually came from America as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned the red cordial.
Exactly.
What does that have to do with anything, or ADHD?
Yeah, so a lot of that controversy started in America, and it started roughly in the 1970s. So, and it's still ongoing. So there was a pediatric allergist that did some studies in this field. His name was Dr. Benjamin, Feingold, and he started doing a little bit of research looking at, you know, is there an association between different dyes? We mentioned red cordial because you've got red colouring, which is a very common one that people are like, oh, is that going to cause ADHD, for example?
So cordial is fine, or?
We'll get to that. Take your time.
Like, was that the thing? Like just red?
It was red color was like a huge one that people were concerned about. There was other colors that they were looking at in some of these studies, like yellow and other colors as well.
There's a rainbow.
But he also was big on doing the studies on elimination diets and things like that. So this is very old research that we have, and like I said, it's still ongoing. It started in rats and animals, animal toxicology studies, but then they started doing it on children and adults, and the results have varied significantly over the course of these years with different studies. What they found is that with some children, they can exhibit neurobehavioral symptoms when they do have red dyes, but it doesn't affect all children. So there's not really a consensus about, that red dyes are harmful. And the reason why it was becoming a big deal in America is because a lot of parents were coming forward and actually petitioning and making it a thing, like, you guys should ban red dyes. It was a really big thing at that time. So there was an American body called OEHHA, so California Office of Environmental Health Hazard. They went and did all this research, and they put together like a systematic review looking at all the different research. So it was 27 studies, 27 clinical trials. Majority of them were double blind and randomized control trials. And again, this is the sort of results or outcomes that they found. Some children did exhibit some of these symptoms, but it wasn't the case with all participants. And they also said that there's not a lot of clear guidelines around what doses, because a lot of the doses that are were from really old studies, like from different guidelines from years ago. So they basically concluded we need a little bit more research to understand if this is actually a thing, if this is affecting everyone, or if it's just a small subset of children with ADHD. But like I said, and like I always say, every individual is nuanced. So if you see your child is a lot more hyperactive, or you feel that you're a lot more fidgety or inattentive when you have things with additives or red dyes, then you know that you might be a little bit sensitive to that. It's like MSG, right?
Yeah.
We know that a lot of the research on that was animal studies and was taken out of context and was rooted in racism and all that kind of stuff. But we know that there's some people that are genuinely sensitive to MSG. So for those people, MSG is probably not going to be great for you, right? If it's going to give you a migraine or make you uncomfortable. We take that same approach with things like food additives and red dyes. If you see that clear association with yourself or a child, then you know that they might be a little bit sensitive to that. But so to make a blank statement that red dyes or red cordial is causing ADHD, no, that's not the case. Maybe for some children it's aggravating their symptoms, making them a little bit more hyperactive, inattentive, a bit more aggressive, but that's not the case across the board. But if anyone wants to read, I'll send you guys the link to that as well, because
We'll put it in the
it was like a
description.
big review of sort of all the research. But yeah, they did agree that we need some more robust trials.
Yeah.
Got it. That's awesome. I did have another question, and again, this is something I'm curious about. I guess this is also quite relevant because being Muslim in this day and age can be quite difficult, and when you add another layer of identity to that, such as a diagnosis of ADHD, it can maybe complicate that a little bit more. Can you share any ways in which your personal religious relationship has impacted your diagnosis with ADHD, or vice versa? Have you noticed anything, changing with your relationship or anything like that?
Yeah. I'd love to hear Ahmed's take on this when I'm done, as a fellow ADHDer, but I always struggled with deen-related activities, especially with things like prayer, in terms of focus. Never really felt like I ever had proper khushu' in prayer. Yeah. And, I used to attend a lot of lectures about like how to increase your khushu', or like, maybe you need to sort out what you're doing outside of prayer, like just lots of different things around that. But it was always something that I struggled with in terms of getting distracted. So how I navigated that in the home space is I always pray really close to a wall, and I try to...
Ooh.
Yeah, so that I can't see anything.
Hack.
Yeah, can't see anything except that wall. I try not to pray with a lot of things around, so like say clothes on the floor or like lots of clutter, because it's very distracting. And I've also found that if I don't pray on time, I'm more likely to miss. So what I've been trying to do, and I've been trying to commit to this a lot more lately, is really trying to get it in within that first like 20-minute window, because I'm more likely to get distracted and to maybe hyper focus on something else and just miss it. And I'll miss it like out of complete like, not because I'm trying to miss it or being negligent, but I'll hyper focus on something, and then the prayer time will be over, So I think that was something that I struggled with for a very long time, especially in winter, like daylight savings, because you've got like 5 minutes between the dhuhr, asr and maghrib. There's literally 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, by the time you make wudu, the next adhan has already
100%.
come on.
Yeah.
So it's very, I find winter very challenging actually, because I've really got to manage my time, and it doesn't always work. So I'm very imperfect, and I'm very happy to be open about that. Sometimes I still really struggle with it. So, trying to use Salah as a little bit of an anchor in terms of structuring your day, I found can be helpful, because it can give you a little bit of that routine that a lot of ADHDers struggle with. Obviously, this, can change depending on where you work. If you work from home, what kind of environment you're working in. But I do find it's helpful to use that as a little bit of a structure for your day, because a lot of ADHD is lack routine, and I'm one of those. So I think there's a lot of challenges, definitely. But a lot of the day-to-day amal is probably the biggest struggle, I would say, for a lot of ADHD Muslims.
What do you mean by amal for the non-Lebanese?
Oh yeah, so like the daily activities or the daily acts of worship, of worship that we engage in, whether that's prayer, whether that's dua, dhikr, even fasting, Ramadan. Like Ramadan is a struggle.
Is very difficult, actually.
Yeah, it's
but
very.
Alhamdulillah, it is. But
But look, I think if you genuinely like ask Allah to make it easy for you, I think it definitely does make a difference. Like this Ramadan that I had, was it this year? Did we have Ramadan?
We had, I'm on the same wavelength. I pre-planned actually.
Yeah.
When was Ramadan? Okay, I'm ready.
This Ramadan, like the one that we just had, was probably the best like I ever had, and it was largely because I blocked out work. I just thought I'm just going to spend this month just doing one thing and I'm just going to be focusing on that. And having a body double for acts of worship really helps. And I know everyone thinks about body doubling like sitting with someone else to do work. But it really, really helps for acts of worship. Like for a long time, I wouldn't go to lectures unless someone was coming with me. Now I'm able to do that on my own, but for a long time, that was a really good accountability hack to commit to going to either a talk or like a Quran class, things like that.
I love that.
What else did you do in Ramadan? I'm actually very, very curious to like make things easier.
Yeah,
so taking notes.
Yeah, I largely cleared up my schedule, and I had a dedicated tarawih buddy that I went to do prayer with, and then I also had an accountability buddy even for like the tahajjud prayers and stuff like that. So I had someone that we would hold each other accountable around doing those things, and I had the time and the capacity to plan my nutrition a little bit as well. And I absolutely utilized caffeine to do a lot of these things in Ramadan. But I sort of, because Ramadan forces you to have structure, because you eat at a particular time, you wake at a particular time, you sleep at a particular time. Now, my husband with OCD absolutely struggled in Ramadan because he has his own routine, his own structure, and he also is potentially undiagnosed, like autistic. So he really thrives on routine and structure. Ramadan was very hard for him because he had to change and adapt that completely, even the prayer times or praying in with a lot of people and constantly that human interaction. So that's what I think what I liked about Ramadan is it gave you that external structure, and I was able to build around that and use accountability for all the things that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I like that. I really like the idea of like body doubling and like inviting someone else to engage in acts of worship with you, because like even the idea of an ummah, like mashallah, like as Muslims, we're a collectivist community. Like we value so much in the way we worship together, not just individually. Obviously, like individually, we are very much like we focus on our prayer alone and our du'as alone, but it can be, a group activity. And I think the fact that you use that as a strength is, subhanAllah, like a beautiful thing within itself, to share your worship with others.
Definitely.
So, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Good stuff.
Very good stuff. I'm excited for next Ramadan, actually. I think this Ramadan didn't go too well. So next Ramadan.
That's okay. There's always another opportunity.
Inshallah.
This was
I hope
the first.
so.
Inshallah. May Allah grant us another Ramadan and many Ramadans. But you know, as you go on the journey with ADHD, you just find different things that work for you. And once you know what your challenges are, you can start to work with them.
Absolutely.
And I think especially from an Islamic perspective, Allah knows what's in your heart. And I don't think Allah's going to sit and, like Allah knows that we're genuinely struggling with things like attention and focus. So I think Allah's very merciful around some of these things that we struggle with as ADHDers. Yeah. And I like to find comfort in that. I'm not a not so great Muslim because I'm not concentrating throughout all the prayer. I'm doing tarawih and my mind's wondering about what I'm going to eat tomorrow and what I had for dessert and, how I really feel like, baklava. Like it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to control some of those things. Yeah. So there's a difference between, things that you can control and things that you can't control. And I think Islam makes space for that.
Yeah, definitely. And these things do get better though with time. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm sure you can relate to this as well. We do find our ways, and eventually I've like coined this term in my head is like spiritual focus like gets better. Your
so
ability.
True.
Yeah, it's like it's its own thing, subhanAllah.
Yeah.
Because of that sincere jihad in Islam. Jihad being internal struggle to any Western listeners. Yeah. But, yeah.
Even having this place and like having these conversations and this network of support,
Yeah.
we want to increase these conversations about ADHD so we can support each other better, so people are more informed about where exactly our fellow like brothers and sisters need help and, you know, need support. And as an ummah, it's our responsibility to kind of provide each other with the support that we need as well.
And to hold space for people that might struggle with certain environments or certain aspects of whether that's a Ramadan experience or, you know, certain acts of worship. You know, I remember in Ramadan, like even, you know, if you turn down someone's invitation for iftar because of sensory overwhelm, people would get really offended about that. Well, this is the right thing to do. It's sunnah for you to accept my invitation. And some people can't really, that's a really triggering environment for them. So I think that's why it's so important to be aware of neurodivergence, because there are a lot of situations, especially when we're looking at from an Islamic perspective, where people might struggle. So how do we balance that out? How do we hold space while still keeping up those religious values?
And it's not a new thing. It's not like suddenly no one was neurodivergent before. I mean, this is something that the Islamic scholars have, I mean, we won't touch on it too much, but Islamic scholars have like touched on in their own work. It's not a new thing. So just general brief education, watch a few videos. Yeah, and
talk to your friends who
talk
have
to your friends, and people do that really well. SubhanAllah. Like actually, I genuinely am so grateful for my friends and the people around me, even in the very broad community.
Yeah,
very very welcoming, very very helpful. You know.
Yeah, and I think we've done a great job of raising awareness today on this episode.
I hope so.
Inshallah, I hope so. Yeah, I think, you know, Eman, you've been, mashallah, such a great guest. I think,
to
be honest, I'm so blessed. I feel so grateful being here. Maybe that should have been my initial grateful statement.
Being here
today. I feel
today.
so grateful being here today and being able to learn so much from you. And I'm sure, like, even Ahmed and yourself, like, just sharing your experiences and being so vulnerable on this podcast is difficult. And I really, really appreciate. And I'm sure all of our listeners will too, inshallah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you guys so much.
Did you want to conclude?
I am concluding. This is my conclusion.
All
thank
right.
you for watching.
Thank you for being here, Eman, and inshallah, stay tuned for our next episode.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan for listening to the podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. To keep updated with the podcast and our other activities, follow us on Instagram @__6 degrees and our website at www.6degrees.org.au.